Welcome to our weekly Church on the Rock podcast. For more information, visit us at churchak.org, download our Church on the Rock AK app, or like us on our Facebook page. Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy our weekly podcast.
Wouldn't we all be happier if we worked out a little system for living together in harmony?
But how can we manage them?
We'll have to work out the full answer together.
Say, Mom, you're swell.
Most family problems can be solved through frank and friendly discussion, which points the way to a happy family life.
You know, this is beginning to be quite a family project.
It certainly is.
Woo! How you doing, church? Good? All right. I grew up in church. I grew up in church in a generation where everybody had the right to spank you. And if they could get to you before your mom got to you, you were in trouble. And then your mom would get over there and she'd be like, thanks. I'm just kidding. That never, I don't think, did that happen, Mom? You're in this room. Okay. She can't remember. Anyways, we are in week number 2 of a series. It's a 3-week series. So here's the good news. Next week is the last week. And then we go into our Christmas series. So it's all rainbows and unicorns after that. But right now, we're talking about church hurt. Anybody in the room ever experienced wounding or hurt in church? You can just raise your hand real high, real proud. The Lord is judging right now whether you tell the truth or not. I'll use a different word here real quick because I think it's hard for men in particular to admit that they've been hurt because that sounds like you're a sissy. And so men like the word no, there's stuff that's happened in church that's made me angry. And I'm still angry. Anybody has stuff that made you angry and you still feel angry? There we go. There's some, all right. I thought I could get a few more hands that way. The reality is that if you've been around church long at all, you've probably experienced some things that were hurtful or painful. And the truth is, everybody who's been around church long has experienced that. And there's a real particular reason for that. Because the church has people in it. If it didn't, it wouldn't be the church. You'd be like, here's the church, here's the doors, here's the steeple, open it up, and no people, then it's not the church. There's people in it. I don't know, people tend to offend one another. Now, while people can be offensive, you actually don't have to be offended. Oh, that'll preach all day. We're just getting started. First service was super quiet, and so I'm like, I guess I got to go longer because that way I want You guys ready? All right, we'll see what happens. The title is Take the Shot. You'll find out why in just a few moments, but I want to make this observation. Often the people closest to us are capable of wounding us the deepest. Now, you could make a fair argument that it should actually be the opposite. That the people closest to us, we know them the best and they know us the best, and we would give them the benefit of the doubt because they've also loved us well at times. They've also done good, and I know the ways that I've been offensive to them, but it isn't like that. It tends to work this way. The people closest to us, we have the highest expectations of. And when you add a spiritual element to that, it is a recipe for real wounding. And so I would add this to it. Few things draw people closer together than shared spiritual experiences. And so you'll hear people say things like, I thought they were a Christian. Anybody ever heard that? Anybody ever said that? I thought they were a Christian. What we actually are saying is that because we both said we met Jesus, we've been transformed by Jesus, that we're becoming more like Jesus, I actually expected more from you, and you failed me somehow. Which brings me to cancel culture. If you don't know what cancel culture is, then you don't have social media. Good on you. I'm super proud of you. But cancel culture, this idea that when someone disagrees with me or they post something I don't like or they say something that I don't like, I can just simply delete them from my feed. I don't have to listen to you anymore. I don't have to read your stuff anymore. And this is how it works. This is confession time, Pastor Jonathan, confession time. It happened to me this past couple of weeks. I don't know if you know this, an election just happened. As far as I know, it's over. But an election just happened, and I've noticed that people will come out of the woodwork on either side, but typically the side that lost in an election really becomes vocal after an election. And I've had good friends, people I've served in ministry with or been around for a long time or serving in ministry, and they're coming out and I'm realizing like they fully bought into this line of thinking. And I've literally had the thought over the past few weeks like, yeah, I just think I'm going to quit following them. That's what cancel culture is. I'm going to remove every voice in my life that maybe disagrees with me or I don't appreciate or doesn't honor what I honor. And like we want to eliminate all of those voices in our lives. And we do this in the realm of spiritual leadership in particular. This is principle number one. Often our unmet expectations create unnecessary opportunities for offense. Often it's the things that I have placed, at least in my heart and mind, as expectations of you, and when you don't meet those expectations, whether you know about them or not, it creates an opportunity for me to be offended, for me to be wounded, which I think actually makes it really important that you and I should consider what we expect from those who are in spiritual leadership. What are the things that we should expect from them, and what are the things that we should not expect from them? And I just want to make a clarification here before you think I'm just talking about me, before you think I'm just talking about pastors, because everyone who has said yes to the invitation of Jesus will find themselves in spiritual leadership at some point. Whether it's with your children, whether it's with a spouse, whether it's with someone you're mentoring or you have led to the Lord, or whether it's in vocational ministry, the reality is that we will all find ourselves in a place where we're actually the one responsible for the spiritual formation and leadership of another, which is a heavy weight, whether you do it as a pastor of a church or you do it as a disciple maker of people. Things I should expect from leaders. I'll give you three things that I think you should expect from leaders: honesty, honor, and humility. I want to clarify these just a little bit because I actually think they're really healthy expectations, and I want to say what I'm saying and maybe clarify what I'm not saying as well. Honesty is that my leaders are vulnerable. Like when they fail, they admit that they failed. They're willing, they're able to take ownership of those things, but you actually know a little bit about who they are. And when a leader is willing to be vulnerable rather than always appear as though they have it all figured out, it's an important quality. The second one is honor. At Church on the Rock, in our staff environment, we refer to this as 360 honor. That I actually am showing honor to the people who work for me or with me, and they're showing honor to me as well. That we recognize that you bring something to the table that is just as valuable as what I bring to the table in the body of Christ, which brings me to the last one, and that is humility. And that's this realization that we are all in the same boat. That I'm actually in the same boat that you're in when it comes to need. We're all in need of the grace of Jesus, just like everyone else is, that we're actually on a level playing field. And that element of humility is essential for people who are in spiritual leadership. Because otherwise you could begin to believe that you're the one that created those outcomes. And you end up trying to steal glory from the only one that glory actually belongs to. But there also are things that I should not expect from leaders. Here, I just want to say this. This is, for me, you know that I have leaders in my life as well. Like I need leaders in my life. I have our elders and I have our board. Often I still have my mom as I have people who have authority in my life as well. And I realize there are certain things that I could expect from them that actually would set me up to be offended. So let me give you one of them. You're gonna, as soon as you see this one, you're going to be like, oh yeah, I know I shouldn't expect that, but let me unpack it a little bit. Perfection. Because we tend to know that, like, well, I'm not perfect, so I shouldn't expect perfection from others. But in these three areas in particular, we can write someone off, we can cancel them like that if they fail us in this area. The first one is perfect reactions. Like, I expected them to respond better when I said this, or when I confronted them with this, and they responded poorly, therefore I am done with them. We actually tend to expect perfect responses in this area of their reactions, or perfect agreement. They're like, on the things, at least the things that matter to me, I expect you to be in perfect agreement with me regarding these things. And I'm actually super grateful for the people in our church and the people on our team who will ask me questions about areas that they already assume I disagree with them about, but they want to have a conversation about it. That takes a lot of courage, because often when you discover that maybe we disagree about something, you'll want to write me off, and vice versa. And the last one is perfect love. I don't know if you know this. If you've ever read the love chapter in the book of Corinthians, like chapter 13, where he's talking about love is patient, nailed it. Love is kind, got it. It keeps no record of wrongs. Like, when you begin to read through the list of what perfect love looks like, you should come to the logical conclusion that you do not love perfectly, and neither does anyone else you know. There's actually only one who's ever loved perfectly. It's a direction that we're headed in, but I don't actually expect perfection from you in this area. But I do expect humility. When you recognize that you got it wrong and you're willing to admit that you got it wrong, and vice versa. But often we expect it in these areas, and then when we don't experience it from people we've set these expectations on, then we write them off in our lives. Which is why for many of us, we end up with virtually no one that we would identify as a leader in our life. In fact, it's very un-American to admit that you have a leader. It's very un-American to admit that you are willing to obey someone, in particular in this area of spiritual things. And the second area is this, that we should not expect from our leaders perfection, and we also should not expect prioritization. Listen, I know we all want to be with someone who is a servant leader, but that does not mean they serve every need that I have. In fact, it would be impossible to do that at some point. Often I think about, I would love to know the name of everyone in our church and everyone's kids and their kids' birthdays. The problem is I don't even know my own kids' names or birthdays. Like, it's hard to, okay, I'm just kidding. I do know their names. Birthdays, I'm super grateful for my phone. In fact, my grandson Finn just had his second birthday. It was not yesterday, but we celebrated yesterday at the Sea Life Center. And thanks to Instagram, I realized it was actually the day before was his actual birthday. But like, I have a hard enough time just remembering those things, right? But we set these expectations that my life would somehow be prioritized above all other relationships for them. So when they don't respond to me in the way I want them to respond to me, or in the time frame I'd like for them to respond to me, or on the platform I'd like for them to respond to me, it's real easy to say they have failed me. But they could just be super busy. You could just be super busy. But we tend to write one another off. This area of prioritization above all other relationships, above all other responsibilities, and even above your own health. Spiritual health, mental health, family health, physical health. Now you look at those and you say like, no, I wouldn't set my expectations that high, but when you think about the things that actually offend us, that create disappointments or wounds, and you were to narrow them down to the specific act or moment, it's worth thinking about these things. I wouldn't want someone to expect that of me. Maybe I've placed my expectations in a place where they could not meet them, which set me up for being failed, which set me up for an offense, and I may be carrying something that I don't need to be carrying. It's my observation. Spiritual leaders will fail to meet our expectations. The bigger issue is how we will choose to respond when they do. I want to say something that I think is really important for you to hear. It was true in the last service. It's true in this service. In fact, it's true anytime I stand up in front of my church. and I look around, I'm so proud of you for showing up. Because I can think of in my mind legitimate reasons why so many people could choose to not be here. Things that have happened in the past, whether you perceived it right or you perceived it wrong, is actually somewhat irrelevant to me. I can think of things that you have experienced for so many in this room that you could have written off church, and here you are, you showed up. I'm genuinely grateful and proud of you. What it says to me is you at least want to hear. You want to think about it. You want to pursue relationship. And I could often think of reasons, especially for people that I'm in a relationship with, why they would feel like they have been failed. And so I step onto a platform anytime assuming that the people who are in the room, the people who are listening, actually want to grow. We want to mature. We want to head in a direction that we believe is healthy. And what you need to understand is that what I'm sharing with you today, our campus pastors were like, oh no, we got to talk about church hurt. And we're the hurt people. Like it's our fault somehow. And I just told them, I said, no, it's true for all of us. I have people who are spiritual leadership in my life. Our elders and our board, and I just made the decision when I said yes to this position that the day may come that they ask something of me or correct something in me, and I may fundamentally disagree with them, and yet I said yes to submitting to them. I have to have it in my own life. Otherwise, I am the sole purveyor of all things spiritual in my own life, which is a lie that we've actually believed about ourselves. And yet when we look at our parenting relationships, no, I think it's critical that my kids honor me as a spiritual authority in their lives. I need those people in my life. And so I made a decision a long time ago that even if I fundamentally disagreed about something, I believe God's using them in my life in some way. And if we're deviating from sound doctrine or theology or whatever, I don't have to keep doing what I'm doing to be fulfilled. I could go do something else. But if I've chosen to be here, then our elders and our board of directors, they're the ones who get to speak into my life, who get to call me out. In fact, every year they do an assessment of my fitness to lead. I thought we should actually do this for every person who attends Church on the Rock. We just do an annual assessment of your fitness to attend Church on the Rock. Just kidding. I have no interest in doing that. But it actually is really important for us as a church that our elders and our board annually assess my leadership. And so they go about that task. They're always trying to figure out how to do it better. And then they bring me their thoughts and recommendations. And then I'm crushed for 2 weeks. And my wife's like, you're not the worst person ever. No, they're actually great. But their job is to tell me the areas that I need to grow and need to improve. That's what it looks like for me in my life. Which brings me to trust and obey. Because I think what's really important for you and I to understand is that it actually doesn't matter if a person is in pastoral ministry, they're in leadership, or if the individual is just attending a church. The reality is that I think for most of us, we've had opportunities to be offended by the church. We've experienced things that could have led to bitterness and resentment and rejection of spiritual leadership in our lives. In fact, I think about several people on our staff, and I know their stories and their experiences, and yet they've said yes to continuing in pastoral ministry. I would say this, offense and church hurt is an equal opportunity employer. Everybody's going to get a chance. And so there's a passage that, because of my background and some of the things that Kitchery and I experienced in a group we were involved with, have made some things really difficult for me. And this area of trusting and obeying was one of them for a long time. And so there's a passage in Hebrews chapter 13 that's a really challenging passage. You're going to love it, though, I know. As soon as you hear it, you're going to be like, that was for me today. That's the only reason that I came to church. Obey your spiritual leaders and do what they say. Let's close with a word of prayer. Just the first word we hate as Americans, obey. Yeah, obey my thirst. That's what I'm like. Really? How could he dare say that in the Bible of all places? This was particularly hard for me for a season, but it was particularly hard for a lot of my friends. And I want to describe something from my past, and I want to preface it with this, because I've shared a little bit before about this. We were involved with a group that I would say did not begin as a cult, but became one. I think it really began as a group that wanted to apply biblical principles and a homeschooling option before homeschooling was the greatest thing around. But they wanted to provide some options. But somewhere along the line, it got seriously off course. And my wife and I actually met working for them. And you've probably heard about them at this point through the docuseries Happy, Shiny People. In fact, this is the conference that we would go to regularly in Knoxville, Tennessee. In fact, if you watch the video, which I just don't recommend, but anyways, if you watch the video, which my wife and I forced ourselves to do because we're like, I guess we should have some answers for the questions that people might ask us. Like the crowds, the choirs of all the students who are singing dressed in navy and white because those are the most godly colors. I don't know if you know that. Those crowds, my wife and I are in those crowds. And there was a song in particular that was one of their favorite songs to sing, and it's the song Trust and Obey. If you haven't heard it, buckle up. Trust and obey, for there's no other way. Like the vibrato. To be happy in Jesus, but to trust and obey. I have no idea why I feel compelled to sing to you every week, but here we are again. And sort of there was this idea that this core thought that the responsibility of young people in particular was to simply trust leadership and obey them to an unhealthy degree. In fact, I would say for most of the female friends of ours, women in particular, this group had thoroughly convinced women that your voice didn't really matter. What you needed as a woman was spiritual leadership in your life of a man. You needed to either be covered by a husband or you needed to be covered by your father, and there wasn't an in-between space like you're 32, you decided you wanted to be single because men are jerks and you're like doing your own thing. You still need a man to be your spiritual covering, and literally things were taught like women don't have their own armor of God. They need a man to cover them, which ultimately produced in many of our friends this incapacity to make decisions. For many of them, it took years and years and years for them to be convinced that they actually had a voice. They could hear from God on their own, that they could make decisions on their own, that they could have their own armor of God that they put on. But it was sort of these undercurrents of things that started to emerge. Things like the definition of grace. If grace is the desire and the power to do God's will, and I find that I don't do God's will all the time, maybe I don't have God's grace in my life. And it took me a long time. I had to go back and unpack some things and rediscover some things when I came out of this, but I realized actually grace is still the unmerited favor of God. He doesn't give it to me because I have the desire and will to do His will. He actually showers His grace on me even in those moments when I don't. But I realized there were some things that needed to be undone in my life in order to move forward in a healthy way. I say all of that to say this. All of us have experiences or reasons that could lead us away from the church. Experiencing failed leadership need not lead us to reject all spiritual leadership in our lives. Just because someone has and has legitimately failed you and I somewhere along the way, the conclusion cannot be, I won't have any spiritual leadership in my life. It's actually really important for you and really important for me that I would keep my heart open to being led in this very personal area of our lives. And so in Hebrews 13, he goes on to say this: obey your spiritual leaders and do what they say. Their work is to watch over your souls, and they are accountable to God. I think if more pastors understood that, less people would be pastors. Like if we fundamentally understood that one day I will give account for how I behaved in the role of spiritual leadership in someone's life, whether it's my children, whether it's my family, whether it's someone I'm mentoring, or whether it's a pastor on a stage, if I knew that someday I'm giving account to God for how I cared for the souls of people, less people would sign up to do it, I promise. But that's the reality. And also, they have been entrusted to you, but you're accountable to God. Give them reason to do this with joy and not with sorrow. That would certainly not be for your benefit. In other words, those who are in leadership in our lives, we should actually give them every reason to be excited about being in that role in our lives rather than the headache that often seems to come people's way. Here's what I would say. Healthy people actually desire leadership and will default towards trust. Now, I recognize many of us have experienced all kinds of things that have actually created an unhealthy perspective in our lives. The question is, will I allow that to be healed so that I could experience something that could be healthy? Healthy people actually desire leadership and will default towards trust. You know why healthy people default towards trust? Because we know how untrustworthy we could be personally. Like I remember the moment I met Jesus. Like I had an encounter with God. I had heard about Jesus. I had been to the altars a bunch of times. I can't tell you what all happened and even really sincere moments back here, but I can tell you the moment I was transformed. Like the moment I encountered Jesus. And the primary thought in my mind at that moment was, I cannot believe how offensive I have been towards the sovereign God of all the universe and how much he loves me. Like that contradiction is the thing in my mind that still sticks to this day, and it actually shifts and changes every other relationship that I'm in. My default is towards believing the best about you. That you actually want the same things I want. You actually want to grow spiritually. You actually want to discover how God wants to use you. You actually want to understand how to read the Word of God. You actually want to be in healthy relationships. My default is towards believing you want the same things that I want. And I'm going to extend the same grace, the same forgiveness, the same mercy towards you that Jesus extended towards me. How could I not, after how kind he's been to me? It's a default towards trust. He goes on, he says, pray for us, please, for our conscience is clear and we want to live honorably in everything we do. And especially pray that I will be able to come back to you. I actually think this is really important because those who are in spiritual leadership, the people you allow into spiritual leadership in your life, should be the kinds of people who actually covet your prayers. They recognize they need you to be caring for them, to be praying for them, and they want to be with you. If you're in an environment where those who are in spiritual leadership in your life actually have no relationship with anyone that they're actually responsible to lead, that's a problem. I can't be in relationship with everyone in our church, let alone just in this room. But the reality is if I'm in relationship with no one, that's a problem. If no one's in my home, if no one sees me interact with my kids, if no one goes out with me on a trip, if we don't spend quality time together, something is off, because healthy spiritual leaders actually want to be in relationship with the people that they're responsible to lead. It applies in your family. It applies in disciple-making relationships. The truth is, it's actually a safety net for me. I need to be known. I remember reading a book early on, before I went to pastoral ministry. It was in Bible school by J. Oswald Sanders, called Spiritual Leadership. And in the book, he sort of makes the case for why you should be really cautious as a pastor against having friends with people who are in your church, being in friendship with people in your church. And I remember thinking, okay, I understand what he's saying. Like, it's a little bit risky. If they can look into your lives, they could ruin your ministry or whatever. And at some point, I realized that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Like it's so dangerous for me not to be known by the people that I'm responsible to lead. Like, it sets me up for real failure, not just perceived failure. Here's the principle I would draw out of this particular passage. Healthy spiritual leaders desire your prayers and look forward to your fellowship. I can just tell you that not just my mom and dad, like there are people in my church who know me. There are people who I'm in relationship with on a regular basis, and it's actually really important for me, although I really enjoy the relationship also. It's actually critical that that fellowship is desired. He goes on, he says this, "Now, may the God of peace, the great shepherd of the sheep, may he equip you with all you need for doing whose will? His will. Not my will. His will. And may he equip you for doing his will. May he produce in you through the power of Jesus Christ every good thing that is pleasing to him, all glory to him forever and ever. Amen." The reality is, and what he's identifying here, is that his job is actually to help you discover what it is Jesus wants from you. What's the will of your Father? What's the will of the Good Shepherd? What's he asking of you? And then when we see that thing happen, when we see it materialize, all the glory always goes to only one place, and that's him. And if you find yourself wanting to take the glory for yourself, it's a natural thing to want. It's a deadly thing to do. I had a good friend years ago. He was never in pastoral ministry, but this is what he told me in relationship to his experience in watching pastors over the years. He said this, he said, "Jonathan, here are the three things that you never touch in ministry. You never touch the gold, the glory, or the girls." I think you're probably right about the reality is, stay away from these things. You're not in it for the money. That's a problem if you're in it for the money. You're not in it for the glory. The glory only belongs to God. And stay away from impure relationships in the ministry. If you can do those things, if you can just keep your nose clean in those things, you'll probably do just fine. I was like, got it. I'm going to try and do that. Like everything in me. I need people in my life who tell me when I'm off course. I need people in my life who tell me when I'm trying to take the credit. Now, I want you to hear something from me, because I think this is really, really important. I understand why pastors could feel weird about preaching from a passage like this. I just don't, and here's the reason. Because I actually never assume that you've placed me in spiritual authority in your life. Maybe you have, but that's actually entirely up to you. I think you're here because you want to learn, you want to grow, you want to have fellowship, you want to worship, all of those kinds of things, but you're actually responsible to decide who those people are in your life. That's the reality. I feel like I get to come here and we get to discover some things together. But I'll tell you this. I've had somebody model this for me at probably the highest level I can think of. And that's my mom and dad. They're sitting right here. I rarely say nice things about them, but I want you to know they're amazing people. But here's the primary thing that has amazed me over the past several years. They raised me. They know everything about me. They know my strengths and my weaknesses. They chose to attend this church where their son was pastoring, and what they have convinced me of over the past 10 and a half years is they actually think I'm their pastor. Do you know how weird that is? Like, I'm thinking about my kid, and I'm thinking, yeah, I need to find a different church. And I love my kid. And yet, my parents have actually modeled this principle toward me, and they know me. They know my strengths and my weaknesses, and yet they've actually modeled this passage in what I would sort of perceive to be one of the most difficult situations I could imagine. Listen, we're all responsible to model this sort of thing. And having had people fail us in the past, the conclusion cannot be that I don't have anyone who's in that role in my life in the future. We all need it. This is the principle. Healthy leaders direct us to Jesus and never take credit for what only God could have accomplished. That's what you're looking for in leadership, which brings me to applications are being accepted for all pastoral roles here at Church on the Rock. Now, applications being accepted. I don't know if you know this, but over the past couple of decades, there has been a dramatic decrease in people wanting to go into pastoral ministry, vocational pastoral ministry in particular. I think there are a bunch of reasons for that, and I'm praying that that tide turns because I do believe it's one of the most holy and helpful vocations that you could be called into. But the reality is that there's actually an aversion to it, and I can understand why. Every time I hear the next thing come across the news channel, I'm just like, thanks a lot for making my job a whole lot harder. And then something happens in my realm of responsibility, and I'm like, thanks a lot for, right? You get it. I understand why people are hesitant, but I actually think that sense of accountability is really important. And so here's the job description that Peter gives in 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 1 and 2. He's a shepherd. He's an elder. Here's what he says. As a fellow elder, I appeal to you, care for the flock that God has entrusted to you. Watch over it willingly, not grudgingly, for what you will, not for what you will get out of it, but because you are eager to serve God. It's actually a really important point. Here's the principle. I'm going to say it first. Healthy spiritual leaders are responsible, joyful, selfless, and expectant. When the joy evaporates out of shepherding, out of spiritual leadership, you should stop doing it. It doesn't mean every moment is happy-go-lucky Pollyanna day, but it does mean that the moment I no longer find joy in doing the thing I've been called to do, I've been created to do, I have the opportunity to do, the moment I don't view it as a privilege and an opportunity and I begin to view it as a heavy, heavy burden, I should move on and do something else because that's a recipe for bitterness and resentment in pastoral ministry. And here's the reality. When people come to me and they're like, man, I heard you had to navigate this thing, or I heard this was so hard and I'm super sorry. I appreciate that, but my response is almost always going to be the same. I don't have to do this. I know it becomes a shock to you, but like if I quit doing this tomorrow, this is going to blow your mind, Jesus will still love me. Like I don't need the title of lead pastor of Church on the Rock in order to feel like I have an identity as a son of my Father in heaven who's madly in love with me. Like I'm always going to be that because of who He is. I get to do this. And there are some days it's harder than other days, no doubt about it. But the moment that I fundamentally begin to believe that this isn't a delight and a joy and a privilege that I get to do this thing, then I should quit doing it because fundamentally I should view this as a great joy and privilege. Even in the hardest of times, I recognize I get to carry something so that other people could experience the redemptive work of Christ in their own lives. Healthy spiritual leaders are responsible, joyful, selfless, and expectant. Here's the next piece. Don't lord it over the people assigned to you. They aren't your people. They've just been assigned. Don't lord it over the people assigned to you, to your care, but lead them by your own good example. And when the great shepherd appears, you will receive a crown of never-ending glory and honor. Here's the principle. Healthy spiritual leaders are servant-minded and have an eternal perspective. I know, you get it. Servant leadership is kind of a buzzword. We talk about servant leadership a lot. The truth is, I can't serve every need that everyone has, but you should see in the people that you allow to be spiritual leaders in your life a willingness to serve. That there is no task that is under them or beneath them. Healthy spiritual leaders are servant-minded, but they have an eternal perspective. I'm not doing this for temporary gain. I'm in this for the joy I get to experience for all of eternity. That's why I'm here. He goes on, in the same way, you younger men must accept the authority of the elders, and all of you serve each other in humility. For God opposes the proud, but favors the humble. There's a really important principle here. You need to hear it. And it's this. I believed when I was younger that I was far more qualified than God had recognized. I saw that, Sylvia. The reality is, I've told you the story before, but it's worth highlighting again. I remember the moment that my senior pastor asked me, first of all, would I also oversee children's ministry? That was almost my last day in vocational ministry. I was like, not only did I not sign up for children's ministry, you don't want me in children's ministry. There's not enough Ritalin for them or me for me to be in children's ministry. I don't think I can do it. I almost started crying in his office when he and his wife asked me to take on. Fortunately, I had my wife, who is astounding at children's ministry, and I was like, honey, would you be willing to take over church? But then he asked me, anybody remember pews in your church, like old pews in your church? We had the orange, like burnt orange ones. I like the color burnt orange. In fact, it's my favorite color. I hated those pews, but I hated them for a different reason, because they were actually gum holders for people. And so people would like chew their gum till it lost its flavor, or we were about to sing, and then they would just go and stick it underneath. How many of you did this when you were younger? Just raise your hand. I want to see. I need some closure here. All right, it's your gum, and all right, thank you. Like my pastor said to me, hey, there's a bunch of gum stuck underneath the pews in the sanctuary. I need you to go scrape it off. I was like, this is exactly what I got into ministry for. Yes, sir. Like, no joke. I'm under the pews just letting God know that he is misusing my mad gifting and talent. Like, I don't know why you're wasting my time down here scraping other people's gum from under the pews, but I don't know if you know this. I'm a lot more skilled than this. And here's what I've realized. Every generation actually believes that they're somehow a little bit more qualified than maybe they actually are, or they're more qualified. They could do what someone else is currently doing better than they're doing it. And he's actually giving a warning to young men here, and young women, by the way. Like, you need to be in a position of learning and of humility, because I've got things I want to teach you that you can only learn under the pew, scraping gum off. Here's the observation. It's easy to believe I could lead better than the people responsible for leading right now. It's easy to believe that. And then you get older and you realize, it was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. Then you have kids and you're like, oh, it's a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. I was able to correct every parent I saw prior to having a child of my own that was 2 years old. Like, in fact, I believed I was a pretty good parent when we just had one kid. I thought, nailed it. And now we have 3 girls, and I'm like, I don't have a clue what I'm doing anymore. Like, I've got to have spiritual leaders in my life. Like, I need people who know things that I don't know. Right? I need it. But every generation believes they can do it better than the people who are currently doing it. And you need some humility, because you won't learn anything without it. This is what he's addressing here with them. He goes on to say this: so humble yourselves under the mighty power of God, and at the right time, he will lift you up in honor. Give all your worries and cares to God, for he cares for you. I was not under the pew giving my worries and cares to God. I was giving a piece of my mind to God. I was letting him know, I'm ready right now. Put me in that pulpit. Cut me loose. I know what my giftings are. I'm ready to roll. Put me in charge of something. And the Lord was like, yeah, you don't really. Like, humble yourself. Slow your roll. Simmer down, Sally. And at the right time, he will lift you up. This is really important. I want you to hear it, because this is the promo code. Maybe you've been waiting on someone else to promote you when you should have just been waiting on Jesus. There's a reality here. There's a principle here, and I want you to hear it really clear. No one can withhold from you the thing that Jesus has asked of you. There are lots of things. Here's what the local church can and cannot do. It can preach the truth, but it can't fabricate faith. And the local church, it can promote community, but it can't create connection. That's actually up to you. We can just provide opportunity. We can promote community, but we can't create connection. It can provide direction, but it can't force action. It can produce opportunity. It can't demand engagement. And here's the one I want you to hear. It can give you opportunities to use your gifts to serve the Lord, but it cannot keep you from using your gifts to serve the Lord. There may be a whole bunch of reasons, but I hear it routinely. People in leadership don't recognize my gifting. They won't give me the opportunity I want, or the opportunity I believe I deserve, or the opportunity I need. And yet the reality is, nobody can rob you of the opportunity of what God is asking you to do. Now, there are some things that require discernment. Maybe you think you're the most mad gifted worship leader to ever grace God's green earth, and yet you can't carry a tune, and somebody needs to tell you that. You just need to hear it. But there are other things you don't need to discern at all. Like you could go and make disciples. You could gather believers together and build community with them. And you don't need nobody in spiritual leadership to give you permission to do the thing that Jesus has already asked you to do. Stop waiting around for them and obey him. And I can just tell you, as a pastor, as a leader of a local church, the people I'm looking for are the people who aren't waiting on me to give them the opportunity to do something Jesus has already asked them to do. And so when I look around, I'm like, man, they're already making disciples. They got a crew meeting in their home. They're creating podcasts and teaching content. Like I look at that sort of thing and I say, they aren't waiting on me to tell them they have permission to do what Jesus asked them to do. They're just obeying Jesus. Quit using the excuse that somebody else has robbed you of the thing that Jesus has invited you into, and step into it. Go and do it. Although we need the wisdom and counsel of our leaders, we do not need their permission to obey Jesus. I look around this room, I see lots of people who are already doing it. This is going to come as a shock to you, but they didn't even call me last week when they invited people over to their house. Because they don't need to. Because Jesus told them to make disciples. Because Jesus told them to build community. So they're just doing it. They're just stepping into the thing that Jesus has for them, and they will discover what he wants to make of it. But if you and I will humble ourselves under the mighty hand of God, he will lift us up in due time. And it's within reason that I could say yes to something in the future that would put me on the floor scraping gum out from underneath pews. And my assumption would be that Jesus wants to teach me something new, not I got demoted. I don't know what the next thing that he'll call me to is, and neither do you, but I know that I don't have to have someone else's permission to do it if it's what Jesus has asked. That's a good word, Pastor. I know, that's why I said it. It's mostly for me. Hey, would you go ahead and stand to your feet? No one can keep you from doing the thing Jesus has commanded you to do. I would also say this, because I got to have lots of conversations after last service, and Paul got to have lots of conversations last week after the service, and what I realize is that for some of us, we just need to know that leadership is willing to take ownership. Like it may not have been that person, but I want you to know I'm sorry for whatever it was. I know Jesus wants to heal it, because I know you and I both need people in our lives who have authority to speak into them. And so Jesus, our prayer is that you would take your word and it would transform our thoughts, that we would submit them to you. We would see those areas in which we had expectations that created opportunity for offense, and we would be able to bring those into alignment with the grace that you've shown us. That we would know how to identify those people in our lives that we would invite into that place of spiritual authority. And that for those of us, as we step into those, whether it's in our families, whether it's in our marriages, whether it's in mentorships, that we would actually take the responsibility seriously of modeling your heart and inviting people into your will for your glory alone. In Jesus' name, amen. Let's worship together, church.
Thank you for listening. For more of our podcasts and to discover how you can connect, visit us at churchak.org or download our Church on the Rock AK app from either iTunes or Google Play.